Hello and welcome to our special coverage of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I am Lati Akiriwale. The headlines. United States to resume diplomatic operations in Ukraine just as its top officials pledge more military aid. There's an outbreak of fire in Bryansk in Russia, where the country says it's at an oil depot. And Ukrainian children find moments of delight painting Easter eggs as many Ukrainians attempt to celebrate one of their most important holidays of the year. We begin with news that the United States has announced new military aid for Ukraine and promised that its diplomats will return to Lviv in the coming week as its top diplomat and defense chief completed a secretive trip to the Ukrainian capital. Antony Blinken and Lloyd Austin told President Volodymyr Zelensky and his advisors that the United States would provide more than $3 million in foreign military financing and had approved a $165 million sale of ammunition. About half of the money will go to Ukraine, while the rest will be split among NATO members and other regional allies. They also said United States President Joe Biden would soon announce his nominee to be ambassador to Ukraine, and that U.S. diplomats who left Ukraine before the war would start returning to the country this coming week. It was the highest level visit by American diplomats to Ukraine since Russia's invasion began.
Again, this is part symbolism, but also very substantive. As a further sign of our commitment, I intend to announce the return of our diplomats to Ukraine. I think we will start probably in Lviv and then move to Kyiv. It may take a few weeks, but I'll announce that tomorrow. In addition, the President will announce his intent to nominate Bridget Brink as our next ambassador to Ukraine. Thank you so much for the agrément that you gave her. Bridget, I think, is known to some of you. She will be a terrific ambassador as well. And in addition, we will be announcing further elements of our assistance to include some foreign military financing assistance on top of all of the drawdowns that.
We are here to support you in every way possible. I think you've seen the evidence of that throughout, but most recently, as you've mentioned, the commitment of an additional $1 billion worth of security assistance on top of some of the other things that we've done. And Mr. President, you may know that when I leave here, I intend to assemble a number of ministers of defense and chiefs of defense, all in support of Ukraine. And we're going to discuss, based upon our conversation here, what more we can do to add additional capability. So you should know, the people of Ukraine should know that we will continue to do everything possible to ensure that you're successful. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Meanwhile, as you probably heard, their veteran diplomat Bridget Brink, who is currently the United States ambassador to Slovakia, will be filling in the position that had been left vacant since early 2020 under former President Donald Trump's administration. The U.S. media had reported that President Joe Biden will formally nominate her later on today. The U.S. also said it was reviewing security conditions in the capital of Ukraine, Kyiv, and will reopen the embassy there as soon as the situation allows in a new diplomatic push in Ukraine since Russia's invasion nearly 2 months ago. According to U.S. Embassy reports as well, the embassy remains shut with a temporary office that has been relocated to neighboring Poland. Embassy staff would start making day trips to the western Ukrainian city of Lviv in the coming days. And speaking about his trip to Kiev, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken says it was a chance to demonstrate strongly America's ongoing support for the Ukrainian government. He says that during his meeting with officials, Ukraine's President Zelensky appreciated President Joe Biden's leadership and U.S. generosity towards Ukraine. Mr. Blinken adds that Russia continues to try to brutalize parts of Ukraine, but that the Ukrainians were standing strong. He also says Moscow is failing in its war aims while Ukraine is succeeding. The Secretary of State says a sovereign, independent Ukraine will be around a lot longer than Russia's Vladimir Putin is on the scene. Meanwhile, Moscow has sent a note to Washington demanding that it stops supplying weapons to Kiev, and that's according to Russia's ambassador to the United States, Anatoly Antonov, in an interview with the Russia 24 TV channel. According to TASS agency, Mr. Antonov said it does not contribute to finding a diplomatic solution, resolving the situation, and that adding that the U.S. was trying to raise the stakes even more and aggravate the situation. And still, reports indicate that Lloyd Austin, the Pentagon chief, will, after the visit to Kiev, head to Ramstein in Germany for a meeting of NATO defense ministers and other donor countries. The discussion on Tuesday will look at battlefield updates from the ground, additional security assistance for Ukraine, and longer-term defense needs in Europe, including how to step up military production to fill gaps caused by the war in Ukraine. More than 20 nations are expected to send representatives to that meeting. And a fire is reported to have broken out at an oil depot in the Bryansk region of Russia, and that's according to the state news agency TASS, citing government sources. The agency reported that the Emergency Situations Ministry has confirmed that there's a fire, and there's also confirmation that it's fuel tanks that have been on fire, adding that first responders were on their way to the scene. Russia's Emergency Situations Ministry received reports of the fire at 2 a.m. Moscow time, and the ministry sent rescue teams to the scene, and this confirmed the earlier updates. The cause of the fire, of course, remains unclear. Russian forces launched missile attacks on Ukrainian positions deployed in the territory of the Azovstal steel plant in the besieged southeastern city of Mariupol, according to a military spokesperson. In a daily video release, a spokesman for the Ukrainian Armed Forces, Alexander Shutypin, also said Ukraine's defense forces repulsed 7 Russian attacks in Donetsk and Luhansk regions in the past 24 hours. Earlier, Ukrainian officials said Russia attempted to storm the Azovstal steel plant in Mariupol, in spite of Russian President Vladimir Putin's comments last week that the complex did not need to be taken. The Azovstal steel factory is the main remaining Ukrainian stronghold in Mariupol, a city that has seen sustained bombardment since the start of the Russian invasion on February the 24th. And Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says he expects the UN chief's upcoming visit to Kiev to bring stronger support for Ukraine. Mr. Zelensky said he expects 100% support from the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres, who will also meet Russian President Vladimir Putin on April 26 and 28, respectively. The Ukrainian president proposed that UN chiefs should travel to Ukraine before he visits Russia. Mr. Guterres will visit Moscow on April the 26th and have a working meeting and lunch with Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, according to his spokesperson Stefan Dujarric. During his trip to Ukraine, Mr. Guterres will also have a working meeting with Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba and meet with staff of UN agencies to discuss the scaling up of humanitarian assistance to the Ukrainian people. And Russia says it will continue to strike at the weapons delivery provided by the United States and Europe for Ukraine, and that's according to its defense ministry. Earlier, the ministry said Russian troops hit a military airport near Odessa, Ukraine, where foreign-delivered weapons were stored. The ministry said Russian troops had launched large-scale attacks on weapons sent from the U.S. and Europe to Ukraine in recent days, with lots of weapons destroyed. Russia has repeatedly accused the U.S. and Western countries of adding fuel to the fire by sending weapons to Ukraine, stressing that it will attack U.S. and NATO vehicles transporting weapons inside Ukraine as legitimate targets. And in keeping with that promise, Russia resumed its assault on the last Ukrainian defenders on the steel plant in Mariupol days after Moscow declared victory in the city and said its forces did not need to take the plant. Mariupol, the biggest battle of the conflict so far, has raged on for weeks as Russia seeks to capture the city, seen as vital to its attempts to link the eastern Donbas region with Crimea, which Moscow seized in 2014. Ukraine's army was not ready to try to break through the siege of the port city by force, according to President Volodymyr Zelensky. But he told reporters at an evening news conference that Kiev had every right to do so. Let's talk now to Mr. Oluwaleke Atolagbe, who is an assistant counsel at the International Criminal Court. He joins us virtually from Abuja. Good morning, and thank you for your time. Welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
All right, then let me quickly begin by asking a question that probably will be on the lips of quite a number of people who are watching this conflict from afar. Do you believe that indeed on either side, crimes against humanity, war crimes, possibly genocide is going on?
Well, thank you once again. I believe evidence will eventually reveal whether there are crimes against humanity, genocide, war crimes, or the crime of aggression. I understand that there are reports that, for instance, the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court, as Karim Khan, QC, has already commenced investigation into activities that might have taken place during this 2-month war. As they say, that even war has rules. That's the reason why the Geneva Conventions provide different rules for such wars. There are things that should not be done. There are reports, for instance, I think around Bucha, the outskirts of Kyiv, the capital of Ukraine, that there are mass graves, and the satellite images are showing that some war crimes might have been committed. That is, probably killing some civilians and some other people that are not supposed to be touched during war. Because during war, it's supposed to be between the military. Now, if there are evidence that such crimes are committed, then it will now be up to the International Criminal Court to go ahead with pre-trial and then trial. However, I believe that a number of issues may be involved here. We should be reminded that neither Ukraine nor Russia is a party to the Rome Statute. Therefore, ordinarily, the International Criminal Court is not supposed to have jurisdiction over activities that may happen in such places. However, I think sometime 2013, I understand that Ukraine did a resolution that the International Criminal Court should have jurisdiction over certain offenses that were committed between 2013 and maybe sometime 2014. Reports also have it that even as at that period, the whole of the activities that the International Criminal Court was called into Ukraine to come and investigate, the International Criminal Court found that there were no grievous crimes that can be prosecuted by the International Criminal Court. Subsequently, they issued another resolution, this time ad hoc resolution, that from 2014, after the Crimea attack by the Russian government, from that period onward, as if they knew there would be anything like this in 2022, that the International Criminal Court is granted jurisdiction to investigate activities of war crime, genocide, crimes against humanity, and the crime of aggression. So that gives the International Criminal Court the opportunity to investigate. And I believe that's the reason why the prosecutor at the International Criminal Court, Karim Khan QC, has now commenced investigation. Also, there are several countries, I think about 43 of them, that in view of this war, that have also approached the International Criminal Court, that they should carry out investigation into the activities that have happened during this period.
Isn't that going to be a bit difficult, considering the fact that the International Criminal Court does not have its people on ground in Ukraine, and that a lot of the evidence that could potentially be used in the prosecution of any such cases may have been moved, may have been tampered with, may have been even, in fact, destroyed by the time any kind of arrangement is made for that kind of investigation to actually take place there in the place where those crimes were allegedly committed?
Yes, these are the challenges. These are actually the challenges. But thankfully, we can see that even the International Criminal Court has already moved in. Many of the times, these kind of investigations are carried out post-war. They are carried out after the war, after the crisis. But in this case, the investigation has commenced. So that gives the opportunity to investigate ahead of time. There is a challenge. I understand the area you are also coming from, which is the fact that the war is ongoing. The International Criminal Court officials and the investigators may not be able to move to site to do investigation. But no matter how little, the evidence that they can garner for now, it will be the best to get those evidence and preserve them before there will now be proper trial. I understand that the fact that there is the war is still ongoing, it will make it difficult for investigators to do their work. But there are some of this evidence, as you mentioned, that can be destroyed. Therefore, it will be better that the investigation should continue. That the investigation should continue, no matter how little, no matter how minimal they are able to work. They should go ahead, carry out the investigation, and then subsequently, if there is now opportunity after the war, which all of us pray that it will end very soon. After the war, then more serious investigation, more detailed and more in-depth investigation. So that's my view on that.
Before I let you go, I must ask, though, that as you said, everybody wishes that this will end at a point soon, and that may also, in fact, help investigations, because the sooner the war is over, the sooner that independent, impartial investigators can get onto the ground there and find out what really is happening and what has happened. But Do you think, now, and I'm not asking you this in your role as an ICC person, I'm asking you this now in your role as somebody outside like me looking in, do you really think that there are any indications that, you know, we might be seeing the end to this conflict anytime soon? I mean, the United States has just announced that, you know, there'll be new aid, more weapons. Russia is saying that it will bomb those weapons deliveries, it will consider them legitimate targets, and it is still continuing the attacks in various parts of Ukraine. So, I mean, do you really think the omens are good, I guess?
I understand the omens may not be good, but it seems everybody is treading caution. Even though we can see the United States giving more ammunitions, more weapons to Ukraine. There are reports, I think it was the German Chancellor that just sounded a note of warning that we should be mindful not to allow this war to escalate into the Third World War. So everybody needs to be careful. Probably we say that we should start putting in prayers that God will touch his heart and the war will end. Because it's the earlier the war ends, the better for all of us. Because even at the end of the war, the question on the lips of many people would be, how easy would it be for you to try Putin and some of the President Putin and some of the highly placed generals that might have been involved in the war? Because Russia is not party to the Rome Statute. So even if at the end of the day they found evidence that they can be tried, the question would be, how would you be able to arrest and bring such people down to the ICC for trial? Because they are not party to the Rome Statute. And then
absolutely correct.
They will not cooperate.
Then they will not cooperate. Actually, they will not cooperate from all indications.
They will never cooperate, except all right, maybe if there is a change of government. There's a change of government in Russia, and the government decides to either prosecute the participants domestically in their own country, or agree to yield some of the people to the International Criminal Court.
Indeed. That is the situation. Mr. Oluwaleke Atolagbe, thank you so much for your time and your perspective this morning. Mr. Atolagbe joined us virtually from the nation's capital, Abuja. Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll take a break, and when we return, we'll have more stories for you, including the anniversary of the Chernobyl nuclear disaster. Thanks for staying tuned. Welcome back. Tuesday, that's tomorrow, April the 26th, will mark 36 years since Chernobyl, the world's worst nuclear disaster, which brought death, misery, and radioactive contamination to a swathe of Eastern Europe. People in affected areas in Ukraine, Belarus, and Russia can still come into contact with dangerously high levels of radiation from the 1986 explosion at that nuclear plant. Following weeks of fighting across the country, that is Ukraine now, the power plant, officially known as Chernobyl in Ukraine, swapped hands back to the Ukrainians at the start of April after Russian soldiers pulled out from their attempt to take the capital, Kiev. The disaster in the then Soviet Ukraine sent clouds of nuclear material across much of Europe after a botched safety test in the fourth reactor of the atomic plant. The nuclear plant and Pripyat, the abandoned town that neighbors it, had become a major tourist destination before the war. And a British businessman who was once the biggest foreign money manager in Russia has criticized Germany over its continued reliance on Russian gas in spite of the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. Mr. Bill Browder, who made millions in Russian markets after the fall of the Soviet Union, said Germany would have to, quote, tighten its belt and experience some economic pain. Mr. Browder said Berlin was effectively helping to finance Russian weapons that are currently being used in Ukraine. The European Union collectively gets around 40% of its gas from Russia, with some nations vastly more dependent than others. Since Moscow's February 24th invasion of Ukraine, the bloc has spent more than 38 billion euros on Russian fossil fuel imports in the face of calls to drastically reduce or end the supply.
At this point, in my opinion, is that we want to starve Putin of all the financial resources that he has to wage this war. If we can cut off his money in every different way, including by sanctioning the oligarchs and sanctioning the Russian government, etc., then perhaps in the future he's not going to have the money to do what he's been doing and plans to do. Every day, Europe, Germany, France, Italy, Austria, various other places who are totally dependent on Russian gas send Vladimir Putin $1 billion every day. And so, just to put it in really simple terms, this war costs Vladimir Putin $1 billion a day, and every day he gets $1 billion from Europe. And so that's kind of a wash. And so if we really do want to stop this war, and we want to stop it from spreading, which is, I think, the biggest concern we should all have, then we have to stop giving him the money. And to stop giving them the money, that means that Germany is going to have to tighten their belt significantly. They're going to have to experience some economic pain. And they can say, well, this is disproportionate. You know, what about the UK, which only gets 3% of their gas? Well, I would argue that Germany has put themselves in this position. They very stridently argued with the rest of the world to become more dependent on Russian gas. They built a pipeline to become more dependent on Russian gas, and a pipeline that was supposed to bypass and effectively squeeze Ukraine economically. And so I think that Germany has a big duty here. I completely agree that Germany is sort of sitting in a very hypocritical seat right now. They're closer to the front line than we are, and they're continuing to give Putin money to pay for weapons to kill Ukrainians and potentially kill other people in Europe.
The US-led sanctions on Russia have generated reversal repercussions in many European countries, with price hikes, burgeoning inflation, and rising living costs for grassroots, coupled with disturbance in global supply chains since the outbreak of the crisis. The annual inflation in the Eurozone accelerated to a record 7.5% in March, according to data published by Eurostat, the European Union's statistical office. The figure for February was 5.9%. Inflation has been driven primarily by the 44.7% year-on-year hike in energy prices in March. According to reports from Financial Times, a full embargo on Russian energy would trigger a sharp economic recession in Germany, which would lose 6.5% of its GDP in 2022 and 2023. According to the UK's Office for National Statistics, the largest increases for UK households were petrol costs. Worse yet, the Bank of England, UK's central bank, warned that the country may see a double-digit inflation later this year due to the ongoing Ukraine crisis. And the World Bank Group has announced that over the coming weeks, it will be discussing with its governors and board of executive directors a 15-month crisis response financing package of around $170 billion to help countries address multiple overlapping crises. Of this, the bank group is working to provide an initial response of around $50 billion by June the 30th, 2022. The response also includes analytical work and policy advice at the country, regional and global levels to inform well-targeted crisis and medium-term interventions. The World Bank Group has presented to its governors and board of executive directors a crisis roadmap which will outline the initial fast-track response and possible next steps. This will be followed by a more detailed proposal to be presented to the bank's board by the end of June. Let's talk to Ini John Mekwa, our business desk about all this and more. There's quite a lot to unpack here in it this Monday morning. Nice to have you on the program.
Good to have you. Good to be here.
Now, the World Bank Group, 170 billion. That's
the largest they've done, and that's a lot. And I know before this we're having the conversation.
Yes, indeed.
And then there are so many questions unanswered. The UK is majorly driving this, and so far they said the UK has contributed $1 billion. But when you see $1 billion and then you see $170 billion, then you ask the question, at a time like this, when economies are dealing with inflation, when, I mean, the year has been described as a year of the squeeze, in the UK especially. Every day we talk about energy prices. Every day we talk about food prices. Inflation is really hitting, you know, 30-year high, 40-year high, and all of that. So who is going to actually pay for this $170 billion? That is a big question. And someone said perhaps central banks of these various economies are printing money, which is not supposed to be, because this is actually what flames the inflation even more. So we don't know where this $170 billion, and what makes it even more ask more question is, this is supposed to be done within 15 months. To help
15 months.
15 months to help emerging economies. And I think the World Bank has said by June they should have given out about $7 billion or so by the end of June, which is just about less than 2 months away.
Absolutely.
You know, so where is this money going to come from?
I can already see some people, especially when you said emerging economies. One of the first questions that came to my mind, and I'm sure came to me, is that Nigeria is one of those economies, one of the emerging economies.
Well, Nigeria is part of those emerging economies. Whenever we talk about emerging economies and all that, Nigeria is part of it, and Nigeria should. And Nigeria has a good thing coming by next week. The 1st of May, which is on Sunday, so I guess it will be next week. There's a 45 billion naira from the IMF. You know, that's also supposed to help emerging economies because of the war and dealing with the consequences of the pandemic. So, well, on paper, there are a lot of monies coming in, but in reality, I guess there are a lot of questions. But another thing is also that some of this money doesn't come in cash. It's supposed to come in advisory, restructuring, you know, and other non-cash efforts to help the economy grow and all that. So perhaps maybe that's where we see a bulk of it, because when you say $170 billion,
that's a lot of money. I mean, when I heard that sum, and then of course the fact that the UK had brought just one, and the UK is the principal driver, the temptation was there to ask who would be the others who would bring up the remaining 160.
Russia is not there, obviously.
Russia isn't there. Ukraine obviously would not be there. China would probably not be there.
US has its hands full.
So, I mean, this is something that, and given the timeline, that is a bit ambitious.
Yes,
but we'll have to wait and see how it goes. Now, even though war is going on, there are people who are positioning themselves to profit. I see here the story about the diamond world scrambling to keep buying Russian gems.
Yeah, well, the thing with that is the company, a Russian company that mines gems, diamonds, and they provide like 30% of the world diamond. They have been hit by the sanction, you know, so you can imagine what that's doing. So the price of gems and stones since last week, they are just going. I mean, we've been talking a lot about oil, and I think this is going to, for some time at least, occupy that space. So a lot of companies, because even before the sanction, the major people who who used the stones from Russia, they are an Indian company. They call them Sutra. And they've already they're having issues because companies are cutting off with them payment, and because of SWIFT, remember?
Right.
It's a problem for them. So operations for them even before now has been difficult. Now with the direct sanction on Astra, that's the company,
right.
We don't know how it's going to be, but obviously for now the prices are high up there. So what other countries are trying to do is because it's going to take effect on the 7th of May. The sanctions take effect from the 7th of May. They're saying, okay, for the clients and other companies you have from now to the 7th of May. So a lot of people are trying to grab
get as much
as
before
they can before the sanctions.
But that's likely to have effect on the price, right?
it already has the effect. In fact, you know the way the markets are. When there's even a notion that something is going to happen, then markets react. So this one has been known for about, the announcement maybe 2 days now. So already prices are high up there and everybody is scrambling to just get what they can before the 7th of May when the sanction will take effect.
Not everybody has abandoned Russia, or at least that's from the story I'm seeing here. Russia and Japan have a fishing agreement.
Yeah, well, they have a fishing agreement because they don't have a choice.
Okay.
So Japan,
Who now? You're talking about Japan, I guess.
Yes, Japan.
Okay.
Yes, because they have also sanctioned some of Russia's corporates, you know.
Right.
So they are not happy.
Which is why this is a bit of a surprise.
Yes, well, actually, this agreement about fishing is what they do every year. And they're supposed to, it expires on the 10th of April. So by the 10th of April, they're supposed to have renewed this fishing agreement. So they have water, like territorial water. They fish on one part, some kind of fish. And then Russia also has, you know, some other agreement with them. And then they pay Russia. They pay, I think, about a lot of money. So that's another way Russia is making money. So because of the war and the sanctions they have put on some Russian company, it was difficult for them to come to an agreement.
The agreement needed to be renegotiated.
Yes, it needed to be renegotiated. And it's even coming in late because it was supposed to have taken effect since the 10th of April. Now it's going to be agreed today. The new agreement is supposed to come today. But interestingly, I guess because of necessity, they've had to come down and discuss, and they still have the agreement. They're going to fish about 205,000 tons of fish from there within the year until next year about this time. Now, their quarrel between Japan and Russia goes even further than this. There are 4 islands they have conflict over, territorial conflict. You know, there are 4 islands, and they are saying that Russia, because I think there's Russia presence there, you know, Russia, they have their army there and all that. So they are saying they are occupying it illegally. Actually, it's been a source of conflict for about 2 centuries or decades. You know, they've been fighting over 4 islands, that's Japan and Russia. And so that has created a conflict. But unfortunately for both countries, they need each other. Russia needs that money. They need the fish because a lot of Japanese fishermen make their living from there. And of course, the protein that is needed in the country. So in spite of everything, they still have to come back and agree, you know, to work together.
Now, Russia, I mean, the fish agreement is just one example of how Russia is trying to maneuver its way and get diversified sources of income.
Yeah.
There are other strategies that
there
it's
are other
using.
strategies, I tell you. You know, okay, first of all, with the exit of corporates and, you know, ban and sanctions, according to Russia's data, about 200,000 jobs are at risk. So they have to find a way to accommodate those 200,000 people who, of course, have dependents and all of that, you know, or else it's going to cause chaos. So what Russia has done is to create some jobs in the public sector, you know, maybe dealing with files, with documents. Back here in Nigeria, remember we have the public works who do the roads.
That's right.
You know, jobs like that. You have the last man, you know, things like that. So Russia is creating jobs to accommodate some, at least, some of these people who have been caught in the crossfire between Russia and other countries. Indeed. And everything like that. And they have a car, they call it Lada. That's a Russian car.
They used to be here. I saw some that were in Nigeria,
yes.
actually.
But, you know, a lot of parts from that car is imported from the Western world. So what Russia has done is that they have remodeled it. They said they're going to start, I think they're going to start production later on next month. They have remodeled it so that they only need components from Russia. So that way, they can, you know,
they can continue using that without having any resort to anybody.
Exactly, yes. And then also, remember we talked about the social media, their IT, ICT.
Yeah.
So they have the alternative for Instagram now. It's been there, but a lot of people seem not to embrace it. So what those guys are doing now is that they went on their platform, they advertise. So if you want to start your business from Russia, you can advertise your business. You can start your business on that platform. You don't have to pay for it. And it seems to be paying to an extent. I think they said about 100,000 people have now come on the platform, you know, just as a way to take away the impact that Instagram and other social media is having on Russia?
This may end up, of course, being that at the end of the day, the Russian ecosystem will be very self-sustaining even after the war, and that possibly that when this war is looked at with hindsight, you may also look at it as a period when Russia became
independent.
Also,
you know, we always discuss the lessons from this war. Personally, I don't think the world is going to remain the same after this. I think a lot of countries, whether they are talking now or not, are watching to see what's going on. What are the consequences of on Russia? What are the consequences of being dependent, you know, on each other? We say it's a global world, but Russia seems to be paying the price now because they believe that it's a global world. So if Russia succeeds, if they can have agreements with countries, for instance, to do the currency swap for their oil, if they can sustain their transportation, you know, remember they see some airplanes,
yes,
and they say they want to work on it. If they can remodel this vehicle, if they can work on their ICT and sustain it, I don't know what the world would look like, but I do believe
it will definitely not be the same.
Yes.
And then, of course, you and I have discussed here what they are doing with the ruble itself.
Exactly.
And Ladi was sitting in that chair on Friday and talking about the digital ruble as well.
Yes, the CBDC, yes. You know, so even the ruble, I know IMF is saying that the ruble is back, you know, but IMF is saying it's not sustainable. But truth is, what we see now is that their efforts and ingenuity seems to be paying off. And if they can sustain it, you know, because countries like India, their corporates are leaving Russia, but they're still buying the oil, you know, because of necessity. We still have like this fishing with Japan. You know, they are also still, in spite of the conflict, they're still keeping the relationship. So if Russia can sustain it, keep the ruble, provide jobs, take care of their ICT skills and all that, I mean, other countries might just be, oh, I can do this also. I have the potential, and we don't know how the world would look like at the end.
And of course, we have the whole idea that many of the countries are still dependent on Russia in spite of all the noise that has been made over the last 2 months plus.
Europe is still, Germany for one, is still depending on Russian gas. I think you just read it.
Yes, that story was on the bulletin
today. If they turn
today.
off that gas now, the country will go into sharp recession. You know, so they're still making money from that. They might not be paying in ruble, you know, they might still be keeping to the contracts that it was, but the economy is still feeding off the European countries, you know, in spite of the sanctions, in spite of the bad sentiments and all of that. So truth is, it's a global world. We cannot 100% as a country stay independent, but Russia seems to be doing a good job with saying that.
While we were talking before we came on air, you had referenced something called the SBM Jollof Index, where you said that they provided a simple explanation for food inflation.
Yes.
Of course, we all know jollof rice, and so I guess it's a play on jollof rice.
We had an interesting conversation on Business Morning on Friday on that.
I listened to that.
Yeah, because they just tried to capture inflation in a pot of jollof rice. When you look at the components and then use that to measure inflation. But I mean, which is one of the reasons why we have World Bank's intervention now.
Right.
The issue of food inflation everywhere, not just in Nigeria, in the UK, in the US. I mean, we've talked about how President Biden is trying to deal with energy and gas and all of that because of food inflation, and it's hitting, according to that Jollof index, food inflation in Nigeria is at a 5-year high. You know, that is
5-year
high.
Well, so all the prices reflect that anyway.
Yes,
we've always discussed that.
Exactly.
Here. Wheat prices, diesel prices, aviation tickets,
yes,
and all of that. So
everything. I mean, so if diesel, which is used for the production of staple food, wheat is not available, you know, because supply has been cut off. the Black Sea, which is the main route for the grains to be brought into the African continent and all of that, we have blockades. I mean, there was a report I saw last week that between 80 and 100 ships have been cut off. They cannot deliver.
They can't move.
They can't move. So, I mean, the supply is not there, then it is just predictable that inflation will keep going. And if dangerously, if central banks are still printing money to meet up with things like this, then inflation is just going to keep going high.
Well, I mean, if you've got carried away with in his analysis, there's more of that later on in the day. Right after this show, there's Business Morning, and then later on, Ini herself would be on Business Incorporated. But for now, thank you very much.
Thank
Ini.
you so much for having me.
And when we return, Russia and Belarus enter bidding races for ISU events in spite of bans from the competition. Do join us again.
Like drops of rain, individuals and groups innovate, birthing ideas that might make the difference in the conversations and action to fight climate change and the negative impact of man's activities. Innovative thinking from Africa and Europe to save our planet, to light up our cities without tearing apart the ozone, making progress safe and sustainable. On Eco Africa, we highlight the efforts to live and grow sustainably at these times on Channels Television.
Stay connected to the world with Channels TV Podcast and get all the trending stories. Simply log on to channelstv.com, click on podcast, select the program of your choice, and listen. Our podcast is available on Apple, Google, and Spotify. Tap the expertise you trust. Touch the stories that touch you. Anytime, anywhere.
Over the weekend, many Ukrainians attempted to celebrate one of their most important holidays of the year, Orthodox Easter, 2 months after the country was thrust into a devastating war. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky vowed in an Orthodox Easter message that wickedness would not destroy the country. Standing inside one of the country's best-known landmarks, the 1,000-year-old St. Sophia Cathedral in Kiev, Mr. Zelensky said in a video address that Ukraine will overcome the darkness that the ongoing conflict with neighboring Russia has brought upon it. Subdued Easter celebrations took place across the country exactly 2 months since the beginning of the invasion launched by Russian President Vladimir Putin in what he called a special military operation. While churches used to be full for overnight and morning Easter services, people have been asked not to gather at churches this year due to concerns they could become targets of missile strikes.
Don't
forget Chernihiv, Mykolaiv, Kherson, Sumy, Kharkiv, Izium, Kramatorsk, all other cities and villages which hear frightening explosions. Let them and all of us hear the firework of victory. Don't forget Mariupol and its heroic defenders. You can destroy walls, but can't break the foundation of the spirit of the whole country. We witness horrific sights of war. Let us see the joyful image of peace. We are fighting through extremely difficult challenges. Let us reach a fair ending on this path, the beginning of a happy life and flourishing in Ukraine. Our hearts are filled with vicious anger. Our souls are filled with raging hatred towards the occupiers and everything they've done. Don't let rage destroy us from the inside. Turn it into our accomplishments on the outside. Turn it into a kind force to defeat the powers of evil. Protect us from discord and separation. Don't let us lose unity. Strengthen our will and our spirit. Don't let us lose ourselves. Don't let us lose the yearning for freedom. Don't let us lose the ardor for a righteous fight. Don't let us lose the hope for victory and the feeling of our dignity, and therefore preserve our freedom.
donning Ukrainian flags and chanting "Send them weapons" and other slogans. Dozens of demonstrators held a candlelight vigil in Toronto's Nathan Phillips Square, that's in Canada. The vigil was hosted by the Toronto branch of the Ukrainian Canadian Congress, according to a post to its Twitter page. This year, there will be one plea above all from Christians around the world, and that is for peace in Ukraine. Candlelight vigils have been popping up in cities across the U.S. and Canada and at Ukrainian churches to show solidarity with the people of Ukraine in the wake of Russia's invasion.
At all levels to support the people of Ukraine.
Russia and Belarus have applied to host future major international skating union events, in spite of an athletics and officials from both countries currently being banned from its competitions. The ISU has revealed a list of bidders for tournaments from 2022 to 2023 to the 2026-2027 session, with Russia bidding for 4 events and Belarus 5. Belarus capital Minsk rivals Taipei City for the World Junior Figure Skating Championships scheduled for February 26th to March the 3rd, 2024. Minsk is one of 6 bidders for the 2025 European Speed Skating Championships. The city has also applied to host the European Short Track Speed Skating Championships in January of 2025 and the World Junior Speed Skating Championships in 2025 and 2026. Russia's capital, Moscow, is one of the other 8 bidders for the 2025 World Junior Speed Skating Championships. The Japan Sports Association has cancelled 3 cultural sporting exchanges in Russia due to its government not supplying funds. According to Japanese television network NHK, around 57,600 euros was needed for this discussion, but this was not provided. As part of the projects, Russian school children were to attend judo and boxing classes in Japan. Japanese students in return were to attend judo training in Russia. Japanese students have witnessed asset freezes, which were put on Russian President Vladimir Putin and Russian oligarchs, as well as some banks. It stems from Russia's invasion of Ukraine, which started on February the 24th, aided by its ally, Belarus. And just before we go, children in Kyiv, including evacuees from other parts of the country, decorated traditional Ukrainian Easter eggs, otherwise called Sanki. The eggs, decorated with beeswax and dye, are an iconic symbol of Easter in Ukraine, but this year they have taken on a more patriotic note. Maria Poshivalo, who works at the Ivan Hunker Museum, a national folklore cultural center, said, even today, many people are diverting from traditional little and not drawing the usual images like stars and flowers. Instead, they want to draw something current, like Ukraine's trident symbol, or write slogans like "Glory to Ukraine," "Glory to the heroes," what is close to them. 9-year-old Bodana was evacuated from the northern Ukrainian region of Chernihiv, which suffered from heavy Russian military activity. Painting her egg in orange and gold, Bodana said it's the continuation of life and happiness. The decorated eggs will be carried to Kiev's Maidan Square at a memorial for the Heavenly 100, referring to the more than 100 protesters that were gunned down in that uprising that toppled then-President Viktor Yanukovych in 2014. And that's our package this morning. Thanks for being with us. I'm Ladi Akeri Duluali. There'll be an update at 5 o'clock. Do watch out for that. But in the meantime, do have yourselves a pleasant Monday and week ahead.